Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Chairmen of the Boards. As you can see, it is just me today by my lonesome, and we're going to be talking about pedalboard power supplies, and there have been many changes in the industry subsequently from the last video that we did on power supplies, which is going back a few years now. So the intent for the podcast today between you and I is to discuss the best power supplies on the market. And I'm going to be perusing the Sweetwater catalog here on my phone by way of the Sweetwater app. And if there are any power supplies that we don't mention, of course, you can ask about those in the comments. However, I think Sweetwater is a pretty good representative kind of cross-section of the major power supplies that are out there. And I kind of want to go through from, highest price to maybe more moderate priced. I'm not going to get into budget power supplies because kind of once you reach a certain floor, there are just so many quality compromises that have to happen in order to facilitate that price that it's not something that I'm going to go through and recommend. So for that really sort of low-end budget power supply, there's sort of a limit to how low you can go and still get something that's good quality that will power multiple pedals on a pedal board. And again, just restricting our criteria, these are going to be multiple output power supplies, isolated power supplies, and for the most part, if not all power supplies that I talk about will be switch mode as opposed to linear, and I'll get into a definition of what that means as we get into this episode a little more. So again, criteria using Sweetwater as kind of their catalog. I'll have that on screen with me so that you're able to kind of see what I'm seeing in real time. So first, let's just get into power supplies and maybe some of the language that we'll use just in case you're not up to speed on this and you want to know a little bit more for this sort of buyer's guide rank ordering thing that we're doing. So there's two types of power supplies. There's one that is called a switch mode power supply, which is kind of more representative of the types of supplies we find in the marketplace now. And then there are linear power supplies, and that's kind of the more traditional power supply, uses a big transformer and regulates it, down with multiple isolated outputs. And historically, the kind of original power supplies that you'd find on pedal boards would be linear power supplies. The early Pedal Power 1, Pedal Power 2, those were all examples of linear power supplies. That also include the Pedal Power Mondo, the 4x4, all those Voodoo Lab power supplies that kind of defined the industry for a lot of years. Those were all linear. And in the early days of pedal boards, they mostly worked well because they were not powering really current-hungry devices or devices that had multiple voltages. But as we moved into sort of the Strymon and kind of out of line 6 as kind of being the most power and voltage hungry of any of the pedals that were out there, we moved into Strymon that were requiring, 200, 300, 400 milliamps. A lot of those Voodoo Lab power supplies couldn't really do that, or if they could maybe only do it with a few outputs, and then if you had a greater number of high current pedals than that, it couldn't make it work anymore. And then you started to see the marketplace shift away from linear power supplies and go into what was called a switch mode power supply. And this is a fundamentally different technology, and it's using high frequency switching to basically make the voltage and the current or create that inside of the power supply. And I won't get into a big technical discussion of what that is, but in essence, it allows you to be able to create more power, more current, and with less heat. One of the big issues with the Voodoo Lab stuff is that in order to create the amount of current and voltage to meet sort of current day demands, and current in terms of meaning like today, not current in terms of milliamps, the demands of today, you needed to use bigger transformers, and the power supplies generated more heat. The old power supplies that they would use in the original Pedal Power 1 and 2, those were steel chassis. and they were vented and they had some heat sinks to kind of help dissipate heat. But when they got into the really big supplies, they couldn't use steel anymore for the chassis, which meant that they weren't getting any protection as far as the electromagnetic fields by way of the enclosure, because they had to switch to aluminum, which is not good at rejecting magnetic fields. And they had to go to aluminum because it was easier for them to be able to deal with the heat issue of those larger transformers. The consequence of that was, though, is it made the pedals a lot more susceptible from noise from the transformer on the power supply. And so when you would use a pedal train pedal board or any sort of pedal board where the power supply would be living underneath the pedals, you would have this issue where you would be putting the pedals right in the magnetic field, and this would create kind of a low-grade hum that would be really impossible to get rid of. And even at this moment, if you're saying to yourself, I use a Pedalpower Mondo or a 4x4 or an ISO 5 or a Pedalpower Digital, those are all examples of power supplies that are linear but use aluminum enclosures, which means they, again, have no shielding for those magnetic fields, and those tend to be noisy in that scenario. And so ordinarily, if you see pro rig builders use them, at least I would hope that they would do it this way, is they would probably put them isolated in a corner to kind of keep them away from everything, and they would never stack anything on top of them because they would know that that would cause some noise. So for the most part, most pros have moved away from those style of power supplies and have moved completely into switch mode. So what we're going to see today is primarily switch mode recommendations. So let's get into it. We're going to start first. The first thing on the list is the Walrus Audio Canvas 22, and it's the highest priced one. And they make several different versions of this. And if we even like click into this, you'll see, I'm sure, from like a drop down menu, and you can see it right here. They have a 5 output. They have an 8 output. They have a 12 output. So they have multiple different versions of it. And they even have a high powered one for, people who want to use quad cortex or those sorts of devices. And the really cool thing about these supplies is, firstly, it is switch mode, so it uses very little heat in order to create the power. It is much smaller because it doesn't have to have this big toroid transformer in it. And I think the other really cool thing about it is that it has some switchable output. So if you have certain devices that require 12 or 15 or 18 volts, it has toggle switches to help you achieve that. And I think every output on here is 400 or 500 milliamps per. So you have a lot of current across every output. You have switchable voltages on some of the outputs. And the other really cool thing with most switch mode power supplies is that you can expand them so that you can take this as your primary power supply and be able to link off another Walrus power supply and be able to use that to get additional isolated outputs if for some reason 22 didn't do it for you. Now, I think in most cases, they're presuming that you'll probably use some combination of their smaller power supplies to get sort of the exact number that you need so you have an isolated output for every pedal. But if you did need 22, and somebody out there might, they pretty much can accommodate any variation, and you could expand it further if needed. And I think that's a really cool differentiator between the linear power supplies of old and a lot of these new switch mode power supplies. You'll see many of them offer the option to expand the power supply beyond the framework of just the initial power supply. Now, I'll say one drawback of something like the Walrus, and we'll see this in a few other ones, is that it uses a separate device that receives the mains from the wall. So when you plug into the wall, you go into basically what looks like sort of a computer charger that has kind of a large module, and that's just converting the AC from the wall to the DC. That's happening externally. That's part of the reason why they're able to make this so small. Whereas if you compared something like the Zuma that we'll talk about a little bit later, or something from Truetone, like their CS12, they're doing all of that inside of the actual power supply, so it has to be bigger as a consequence. I think some people do get fooled by that, however, and they think, well, I'm seeing that this power supply looks so small in the photos, but then you have to figure out what to do with that giant conversion that's happening from the AC to the DC side, and you have to figure out where to put that. And most people aren't just putting it loose on the floor somewhere because it's a kind of an important part of the whole operation. So generally when you see a lot of pro rig builders, I've seen Brian do this a lot of times where he'll actually either mount it on top of the power supply or behind the power supply, and you kind of get not as much benefit of the space saving aspects of something that's really narrow like this Walrus one, and it kind of takes up space again. And so it's sort of, I don't know, a little bit of a bait and switch, and that's not to say that they're doing that intentionally at Walrus, but it's definitely something to consider where you still have to make space for the footprint of the component that plugs into the wall. It doesn't do that all internally here. So again, that would apply to the Walrus Canvas, and again, all their variations, the 5, the 8, the 15, the 22, or the high power one. So I think that's a great power supply option though. Like honestly, I have I think I have the 15. I haven't integrated it yet, but I've used it on a lot of things, and it seems very well built. I love the size, absolutely fantastic. Now, the next one we're going to look at here is a Cioks, and this is you can buy them bundled. They also sell these individually, so the price is reflective of the bundle. So it's combining what's called a Cioks DC7, which is a 7-output power supply, with an extension supply, which is the Cioks 8. So it gives you 15 outputs for $374. Now, you may be looking at this and saying, wow, this is really, really expensive. And you'll notice here in the photos, and again, I'm going to have this on screen for those that are watching on YouTube, these are very low profile, just the same way as the Canvas was in terms of the height. I think they're just an inch high. They're certainly a little deeper, but if you look at the DC7 and you look up close, you'll notice that the mains are included. So you can connect with your IEC cable from the wall into this power supply directly, and you don't have to have an external box in order to facilitate that. And then the 8 is one of those auxiliary supplies where you can expand and extend the initial supply and add on additional power supplies kind of as needed as sort of their separate power supply modules. And this is, again, a really cool thing. Now, my opinion on power supplies is that the Cioks to me is sort of the best in class. And I'll give you a couple reasons why. I think the first is that every single output is switchable in voltage. So you never have to have any concern, no matter what pedal ends up going in what spot, you will be able to accommodate the voltage that's needed, whether it's 9, 12, 15, or 18 volts. You'll always be able to accommodate feasibly any pedal that would be out there, and you can still parallel them if needed, or you can current double, or you can voltage double. If you have something like a memory band that takes 24 volts, you can set these two to 12 and then get the combination of the two 12 volts to get to 24. You can still do all that stuff. That's really, really handy. The other thing is at 9 volts, this is 660 milliamps per output. Also highest and best in class. The drawback that some people have is that they don't like the RCA connectors because it doesn't use the same traditional connector on the power supply end that most of the power supplies in the industry use, which is a 2.1 millimeter barrel connector. Now, I'll say the RCA is a much more reliable connector comparatively to the 2.1 millimeter. They make better contact, they are more robust, and overall just a better connector no matter what way you cut it. I just think some people see it and they get intimidated by it and they're not exactly sure how that's going to work in the pedalboard system. But not to worry, they provide their own power cables, and they're also very easy to modify if you ever decided that you wanted to customize your own lengths. And Switchcraft is my recommended RCA connector of choice if you were to cut down the existing cables and then modify it. Just one thing to remember if you're doing this DIY, that comparatively to a 2.1 millimeter barrel, you'll need to reverse where the center conductor and the shield go, because on an RCA cable, it's different. So basically, on the RCA side, you'd be wiring it the way that you would do an inverted polarity cable for a ordinary 2.1 millimeter barrel plug. But of course, you can always test that before you connect it to any pedal, which I always recommend that you do to ensure that you're delivering the right polarity to the pedals that you're powering. But if you're not somebody who's customizing it, you don't even have to worry about that. It's already taken care of with the types of cables that are provided from Cioks. But this is definitely the best one. And I think that they have maybe a few options here as far as maybe they don't offer you the ability to do it, but they have a couple of different options. They have so the DC7 is kind of like the primary supply the mains connect to, and then you can expand it with a Cioks 4, a Cioks 8. They also have one called a Crux, which is their high-powered power supply that can do things like the Quad Cortex, which is a really small little extension supply that you can use to power a Quad Cortex. They also have a smaller version that can take mains, which is called the Soul. Really, really well thought out stuff. I really love their products. To me, that's the best in class, but really, really good. We see again the Walrus Canvas here again. We already kind of talked about that. It's ostensibly the same thing. I'll just mention this one briefly because it's another Cioks supply. This is called the Ciokolate, or the Ciokolate. This is a earlier version of a Cioks that is linear. Now, this does have a steel enclosure, I believe, to help with some of that shielding from the toroidal transformer. But really, I don't see much use for this if you have the ability to afford the bundled versions of the Cioks DC7 and Cioks 8. Something like this, I kind of think is obsolete. Obviously, it's all under one roof, but I don't think that there's a lot of benefit of using this, and I don't think that the current that this provides is not equal to what the switch mode versions provide. It's also much heavier, and so you could use this, but I think that you might as well just be going to the Cioks. Now, here's a really interesting one, which is the Fender Engine Room, and they have a few different versions of the Engine Room just to kind of give you a little heads up. There's what's called the Level 5, which, as you might imagine, is a 5-output one, and it's a little bit more vertically oriented instead of horizontally oriented, as most pedals might be. There's the Level 8, which, as you imagine, is an 8-output version. And then there is the 12, and then there's also, I guess, a black edition. And this is a really underrated power supply. I think Fender has kind of come in and out of the pedal game a few different times in my lifetime. And I think that this incarnation of Fender pedals is probably the best that they've ever done, from the power supplies to the accessories like pedal boards and the cables as well that they're doing that come with them, and of course the pedals. I think that the Engine Room is probably the most slept on of all of the power supplies out there. They're really affordable. They work great, and one of the things that's really cool about them, if I show you from the back of it, like, it obviously accepts the mains into it, but you can expand to another power supply with AC. So they have kind of a female IEC connector that you can use to add on another Engine Room or another power supply of your choosing. And the really cool thing about that I think is worth mentioning is, on those Cioks, when you're expanding them, a common misunderstanding that people have, and this is the same of the Cioks, this is the same of the Zuma, this is the same of the Voodoo Lab, the modern Voodoo Lab stuff like the Pedal Power 3, and then all their modules that you can expand like the X4 and X8. And we'll get into those later on here, I'm sure. Is that you're still drawing from the primary current source. So you're still drawing from the mains that are coming into the supply. So whatever the DC7 total, let's say we're using the Cioks for example, whatever the total amount of available current on the DC7 is, let's just say it's 3 amps, that's still the source that you have. Even when you expand it, it's not like you get to start over and get another 3 amps again when you expand to an auxiliary supply. It's still drawing off of that main current source. Now, the cool thing about the Cioks is it gives you a metering so you can see at what percentage you are using of the total amount. So, like, you can see if you're at 10% of max or 80% of max or whatever it is, so you know when you're getting close to the threshold of the limitations of the power supply. The Fender doesn't do that, but you can expand to another supply with its own mains. So that means that you get to start all over again and have the full capacity of the power supply, and you're not sort of bleeding off or leeching off of the initial power supply connected to AC. Even though it's isolated, you can't restart and get a whole new group of a set of current that you can use to power the pedals. You still have to operate within the parameters of the main power supply that's receiving the AC. On this, the engine room, if you were to take a level 12 and then add on a level 8 and use that DC or that AC through to do it, you get the advantage of having all those isolated outputs plus having a whole new batch of current that you can draw from. So if you have a bunch of high current pedals that are beyond the scope of what the power supply can produce, this is a great way to have a reset and be able to start all over again. And none of the other power supplies out there in the marketplace, I don't think, have this option. The other cool thing that it has is it does have USB on the front, which can be cool. It has USB-C, and it has like the standard, what is that, USB 2.0 or whatever it is. And so people can charge their phones off this thing, or if they have some sort of like Bluetooth thing that they need for turning pages on like digital sheet music, that's really cool. It's got a couple of variable voltage outputs, but it's all otherwise 9 volts. But I think that for the money, this thing is pretty incredible. It's $299. It's got 12 outputs, so that's greater than the Zuma. It's got 2 variable voltage outputs, which is the same as the Zuma. I think that this is a great buy. Like in terms of best budget buys, I think that the Fender one is right there and should definitely be considered by people as a high quality option. And the next one is just the blackout version, ostensibly the same thing. Now, here's one I actually have no experience with. I know the guys at Rockett well. This is called the Juice Bar Bundle, and this looks like it's, again, maybe some sort of switch mode power supply again. I don't know if this is a rechargeable thing. Or if this is something that's designed to just stay plugged into the wall. I don't have any experience with this one, so I can't comment on it. Generally, Rockett stuff is really good, and I know those guys well, but I don't know if I have much of a commentary in terms of how that works in relationship to other stuff. Here's a good one for us to talk about. This is the Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 3 Plus. Now, we know from talking before that the Pedal Power 2 and 2 Plus were the industry standard for decades. And they were kind of the last to move to a switch mode power supply, but their power supply is very, very good. In terms of the build quality, the Pedal Power 3 and 3 Plus are, as good as anything else that's out there. Very high quality, again, with everything that they do, and I'm really glad that they moved to switch mode. And the cool thing about this is, even though you have basically all these 9 volt 500 milliamp outputs, which I think is totally sufficient for the majority of people, it's got some variable voltage outputs that you can see that can move between 9 and 12, and there's a 500 and a 200 milliamp. And then you have these 12 volt 1 amp throughs. And this is to expand to their what's called an X4 or an X8. So they're, again, those like little modular power supplies that give you some extra options. Now, the drawback here is it definitely doesn't have as many options for 18 volts and variable voltages as something like the Cioks or the Fender even, or the Strymon Zuma. And it's ostensibly the same thing with the Pedal Power 3. You just have a few fewer 9 volt outputs. I think that in terms of quality, this is as good as you're going to get. I think if you needed variable voltages between 9, 12, 15, 18 volts, this one might not be a good pick for that because it doesn't offer that. I can't remember whether the X4, X8s do that, but we'll look a little further and maybe clarify that as we kind of get down further on the list. But as far as quality, if you just need 9 volts, primarily maybe a 12 or a 15, or it just looks like it's just 12, 9 or 12, and you want some expansion to additional 9 volts beyond what this can do with the 12 outputs that are there, I think it's a great solution, and I think that the build quality is what you'd expect from Voodoo Lab. This is one that's the same price as that, as the $279 for the Mondo. This one is linear, and I think, although a lot of people have used this, I don't really think it has a place anymore in the marketplace. I think it's obsolete. it can be noisy in the context that we're using it. And if you're drawing most of the current out of this, which most modern pedal boards would, one thing to know about linear power supplies, and we talked about about noise related to the transformer and the fact that this doesn't offer any shielding by way of the fact that it's aluminum. The more you draw against the total amount of current. So if this produces, let's say, 2 amps, and we're drawing 1.8 amps, which is 1800 milliamps. The closer we get to that 2 amp threshold, the more the magnetic field intensifies. So the more you draw against these, the closer you get to the ceiling of what they can do, the more noise it has the propensity to create. And I think that most modern pedal boards sort of exceed the capabilities of this. Maybe not everybody, but I'm saying most of the modern pedal boards exceed the capability of this. And even when it was out, honestly, like I struggled to use it because if you were trying to stash it under someplace, you didn't have any benefit again of the shielding of the steel enclosure. So I ended up trying to use the Pedalpower 2 as much as I could until the Truetone stuff came out, and that kind of saved the day. That was kind of the first really commercially available quality switch mode power supply that you could do that and didn't risk a bunch of noise issues. Next, we have the Strymon Zuma. We've talked about that a ton. I think that was kind of the second big switch mode power supply that had come out following the Truetone stuff. The Truetone, again, like the CS12, the CS7, CS6, those were kind of the early switch mode power supplies that were for pedals. This was kind of the second big one and was hugely popular. This one, again, everything I think was 500 milliamps across all of the standard 9-volt ones, which was 6 or 7 of them. And then you had 2 of the variable voltage that would go 9, 12, or 18. And then you had that ability to go out to an external power supply with their little Ojai. And I think they have a few different versions of that now. I think that these, in terms of like what they offer, is great. One thing that I think is the drawback of the Zuma, and my understanding is that they fixed this, but in the early days, they were a little bit underbuilt mechanically, I would say. And when I say mechanically, I don't mean like the circuit design, I mean like the enclosure. And they used really short machine screws, and they would often rattle out of the enclosure. And even the IEC would often rattle loose, and then you'd have like washers like rattling around inside the enclosure. And so I think that there was a little bit left to be desired in terms of how the assembly of the enclosure was, because it was susceptible to kind of coming loose. And again, my understanding is that they've resolved that. When I would build with them, I would replace the machine screws for longer screws. And you have to be careful when you do that, because sometimes mechanically they use short screws because they don't want the screw to sort of penetrate the welded PEM nut on the other side and like hit the circuit board and like, short something out. But this had clearance for that. So I would replace those. And then with the IEC, I would use a locking washer. I'd replace that in the interior, in lock washer and nut, to make sure that was staying as solid as possible, and then use some Loctite on it. But again, I haven't opened one up in several years, but my understanding again from Brian and Grant is that they're better now in that regard. But as far as like the circuit, it's fine. But again, I think that Cioks wins at this primarily for me because, again, every output has a variable voltage. It has a meter that tells you how much of the current you've used up of the total, even when expanding it. With the Strymon, you have no idea. If you add on 3 Ojais, you could do that, but you wouldn't know where you were in terms of your current limitations of the total. Again, we talked about the Walrus already. This is just a different number of output version of the very same one. I think we also talked about the Juice Bar. I haven't tried that, so I can't speak to it. Electro Harmonix, this one I think is relatively new. I haven't tried this one. Their original power supply was not really well built. I can't speak to this. I think most of their stuff is typically made overseas because they're trying to get it at a price point. Let's just take a look at it and see if there's anything obvious that we can see about it. It definitely appears to be switch mode. It takes mains. Actually, no, maybe it's not switch mode. It may be linear. And the reason why I'm saying that is that it has a selector switch on the back for the AC mains, which usually means that they are using a multi-tap, probably a toroid or C-core or R-core transformer that you have to switch whether it's going to be plugged into a US, voltage or a European voltage. And the switch mode can do that automatically. It doesn't need any sort of slider switch in order to facilitate that. And I also say that because you can see here that they've put little boxes for all the different voltages, and then they look to color it in with like a red Sharpie so that you can see what voltage you're dealing with. So I would say kind of already on that metric, it's kind of a disqualification. At 250 for a linear power supply, like you just wouldn't do it. You just wouldn't do it. You would pay whatever the $10 extra or $15 extra, $20 extra, and you'd get the Walrus Canvas 15, and you have 15 outputs as opposed to the 10 of theirs, and you'd have a switch mode power supply you can use anywhere in the world. We talked already about the Canvas again, and these engine rooms are just a smaller version of the larger engine room. Here's an interesting one that we haven't talked about yet, the Iso Brick by MXR. These are switch mode power supplies. It's similar to the Walrus in that it has an external connection to the mains. Then you get like a DC plug that comes into this, which again has its own drawbacks because you have to figure out where to put it. But it looks like here, if we can look at the voltages, it's dealing with 9 volts, 500 milliamps, on most of them. You have a few that are 300. You have 2 that are variable voltage, kind of like the Zuma from 9 to 15. And then you have a high current 1.5 amp, 9 volts. That's great. That can power some heavy duty stuff. And then you can also expand this out via a link. So you can add additional power supplies separately from this, which is really cool. So I think this is sort of a similar thing to what Walrus is doing. I think that this was out before that. This is a little deeper, as I recall, when I've seen them. But again, MXR makes good stuff. I mean, they have like a full-time engineering staff. They are doing this stuff all day long. I haven't tried this one specifically, but I would presume that it's good. This Cioks Eventide power supply, I mean, to be honest, this is exactly the same as the Cioks DC7. It's just branded for Eventide so that Eventide can have kind of like a house power supply that supports their particular devices. There is no difference between getting this or getting the DC7. It's ostensibly the same supply, but it's white. NUX or NUX, depending on how you say it. This is become a more popular kind of Chinese-based company. I've never seen this power supply before. I didn't know that it existed. It looks like you got 6 9 volts, and then you have a couple of variable voltage outputs, kind of similar to the Strymon. And you see here at the different voltages, the 9, 12, 18, it shows that it drops the current. That's typical, and even the Strymon does that, just as a disclaimer. They just don't say it. It looks very similar to the Strymon in terms of how they're doing it. It looks like they also give you a variable voltage output for the 10th output, where you can drop it down to 6 volts and up to 12 volts. So that's kind of cool. I mean, in terms of from the outside, it looks like it does a good job. It does cool things. It doesn't appear to have any sort of expansion ability, but it kind of looks like their take, or maybe it does. I don't know if this is a 9 volt, 1.5 amp. Maybe you can buy the USB on the back, but it looks like on paper, it would meet a lot of people's criteria. $250. I mean, again, it's not like that much cheaper than just going to like a really known power supply like the Canvas for $20 more. But I'll leave that up to you. Next one, this is one that we haven't talked about that's pretty cool. This one kind of predated the Walrus, but is very similar in size and in its abilities, which is the Mono power supply. I've used one of these and they're great. This one has that 2 amp 5 volt USB output on the side. You can also expand it via this 24 volt in and through on the side there, so you could add on additional modular power supplies from them. It looks like every output has at least 500 milliamps, and then you have, again, 3 with selector switches for 12, 9, and 18 volts, which is great. This one, again, reminds me very much of the Canvas, and again, this came out before the Canvas, and I believe that they have multiple different sizes. So their large is 11 outputs, and let's just see what the medium is. Medium, I would say, okay, that's 7 outputs, and then the small is 5 outputs. So you have several different options of how you can run this, depending on your desires. And this is a cool little thing, and you can expand it out, which is always great. This is a fine power supply. I think that this is a totally good option. It's actually very affordable. You get 11 outputs for $239, so that's one fewer than the NUX, but it's $10 less. Now, again, this does require that external power supply that takes the AC mains and does the DC conversion. So you still have to figure that part out. But it's only an inch high. It's narrow and wide. It's a very similar style to, again, how the Walrus is. We talked a little bit about the Pedalpower 3 already. We talked about the Canvas. This is the high power one. We'll just talk about it for a second. This is just an extension of the main Canvas. If you had something, again, like a Quad Cortex, you could power it off of this as an extension supply to kind of get those super high current, maybe multi-effects devices or amp sims that require a lot of power. Again, we talked about the Walrus. Here's a variation of the Zuma that's kind of a more low profile. This one does take the AC mains. You can still expand it. It puts all of the DC outputs on the left side there. You have one variable voltage output. This might make sense for like a super compact power supply because it sits much lower than the ordinary Zuma that we all know. But again, it kind of runs into the same issues. Like you could get a Cioks that's this size and this price point, and it would have the main still included, and it would have variable voltage on every single output. So I don't know that this is like a huge benefit for 5 outputs. And again, you can expand it, but again, I don't know that it's a great deal. Like here's the DC7. It's actually less money than the Strymon, and it offers variable voltage. Again, I just don't think the Cioks can be beat. That's kind of my favorite one. We talked about this Electro Harmonix already. Here's another good one, Truetone. So we haven't talked much about this. This is their new one that replaces the CS12, and it's ostensibly the same thing, except it just doesn't have that AC output. And I think originally Truetone had done the AC thing because they wanted to be able to cater to the people that use some of the Line 6 M series stuff, which was very common in Nashville at the time. And so they wanted to be able to give people a way to power an M9 with just having a single cable and not having to use the wall wart. And now that people have kind of migrated to HX stomps and stuff like that, there's less of a need for it. So this is ostensibly the same thing. And you have some ability with the dip switches underneath to make it 18 or 12 volts on certain outputs. But it's a great power supply. I think that these are great buys. They're pretty affordable. $219. It's kind of one of the lower price ones of kind of those bigger power supplies. And they have a couple of versions, I think. I think they have like a 5 or there's a CS11. It's 11 output. You can still buy the CS12 for under $200. They have a XP8, which is like the expansion 8. And then they have an XP5. And so that's like an expansion 5. I'll just show you one of those so we can just see it here on screen. And yeah, it's very cool. You get 5 outputs. It's got that through if you want to expand it out. You want to do a couple of them. They usually do a good job. I always like Truetone. I've used their stuff on some of my own rigs. Here's a Friedman supply. I think some people talk about this every once in a while. It's pretty simple. I think that when this came out, it was kind of right around the time that things were really changing in terms of voltage and current demands, but I think that it's well built and is fine. And if you have one of his pedal boards, it's designed to fit with those. So I believe is it 9 or 10? Let's see, 3, 6, 10 outputs. And I think that they're all 9 volts. So if you have 9 volt pedals, this will work great. It's got 10 outputs. I believe it is switch mode. Yeah, it's definitely switch mode. And, you know, you could definitely get this if you had his system. I think that there may be better options for the price point. Not that this isn't good or won't do a good job. It's just, it's sort of limited in what its scope is. If you have, again, pedals that have different voltages, things like that, you just may want to have that flexibility. We talked a little bit earlier about the Ciokolate. This is kind of the same thing with the DC-10. It's a linear supply. I just think that we've outgrown that as modern guitar players in our pedal board needs. So I wouldn't spend any time with that. This AC-10 could be interesting for certain people that do have AC-powered pedals because it offers a combination of AC and DC, and there's no way that you're going to be able to get around that. You can't do the AC in a switch mode format. So you're going to have it plugged into the wall, have to use transformers like this. If you did have something like this, this could be an option. But that would really be the only condition that I would see the AC version used. Again, we talked about the Canvas Link. Here's the good old Pedalpower 2 we talked about before. I think if you were going to go with a linear power supply, this is a great option, or that Cioks is a great option, like the Ciokolate or some of the different versions that are still using steel cases. But again, obsolete sort of in the way that we use pedals now. For most people, they won't be able to get away with this. But at the time, it was really the best in town. The 4x4, I think, is sort of unusable because of the aluminum, because of the noise factor, and again, because of the current demands of today's pedals. This is also obsolete, but also just adds in so much propensity for noise. I would never use it unless absolutely forced to. I think you'd be better off getting the Pedalpower 2 if you could use the specs of that, or that was still workable for your rig. I would try to avoid the Pedalpower 2 or the Pedalpower Mondo, the 4x4, the ISO 5, the ISO 5, the 4x4, the Mondo. I feel like there's another one I'm missing, the digital. I would stay away from those. A T-Rex fuel tank. I haven't seen these in like at least a decade. I didn't even know that they still made them anymore. I believe that these are linear supplies, and they're pretty limited in what they do. Again, I think for the money, you'd just buy a Truetone. You could buy a CS12 for this, for less than this. Yeah, so here's CS12, 197. It's got 12 outputs. You got variable voltages. It's got plenty of high current stuff. You'd be better off getting that. We talked about the Canvas. I don't know anything about this Gator supply. It looks to be, it definitely is a linear supply because I see a slider switch for voltage. Gator typically makes high quality stuff, so I don't have any questions about the quality of it. I don't know what the material is, but again, I think that we've sort of outgrown the linear supplies in the pedalboard world for most of us. The Ojai, we talked about a little bit as it related to the Strymon Zuma, using it as an expansion supply. I think that these are fine. You got some variable voltage outputs. You could use it as a standalone power supply if you wanted to use the module thing that connects to the wall and then turns it into DC. But again, it just seems like there are better options if you were going to use it as a standalone power supply. This would make more sense if you're expanding out an existing supply from the Zuma. Cioks 8, similar thing. It's for expanding out from the DC-7. I haven't tried this mission engineering thing. Let's see. It's confirming I'm not a bot. I've never seen one of these in the wild, but it looks to be a switch mode supply. It looks like it's kind of following a similar, sort of style of power supply as like the NUX or what Rockett is doing. I haven't had any experience with that, but all right. Here's one that we were meaning to talk about. So here's the X8. This is from Voodoo Lab, and this is an expansion for the Pedalpower 3. So you can go into the Pedalpower 3, you can expand out, and then you get additional 9-volt outputs, 8 additional 9-volt outputs. Now, I think the drawback of this whole system with Voodoo Lab is it's pretty much dependent on 9 volts. So if you are wanting to go above or below 9 volts, you're kind of screwed with these because they really don't do anything above 12, or you'd have to use a voltage doubler to get the 18 volts. So I don't know how valuable that is. for me, it could be a drawback because of the types of voltages that I would want to use of pedals, and there's some limitations there. But if you just know you're a straight 9 or 12 volt person, or you would be okay with using two outputs to accommodate 18 volts, then maybe it's fine. But again, you just have so many choices now. I don't know how valuable it is. Here's another MXR Iso Brick. I've used these before. Some people have complained about noise on these. I haven't had that experience, but I haven't used it a lot. I used it for this guy's rig named Eric Krasno. He's a great guitar player down in LA. And played with Lettuce and kind of has a solo thing going on. And it was fine, but again, it's that same thing where you have to still connect to the wall with a separate supply that then brings it into here to get the DC, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. And you have some variable voltage with a pot where you can go between 6 and 15 volts on a couple of them. Otherwise, they're kind of lower current. You have a few 300, you have a 400, you have some 100 ones. Again, I think at 169, I would just pay the $20 more and get the Truetone CS12 at that point. It's probably more worth it. I don't know anything about this Art ISO 8. I've never even heard of this before. This looks to be a switch mode power supply, though, from what I can see. Not bad. We already talked a little bit about the Ojai. This is just like a little module for a temple thing. This is the Cioks, what is it called? The HI5 mod, Hi-Fi L mod. This looks to be a switch mode supply for the people that use temple pedal boards. All right, here's a cool one. The Soul. So this is kind of like the Strymon, whatever it is, R30, where basically you have AC mains here, so you don't need to have any external supply, and then you just have 5 outputs. Now this one looks like you can't expand it. So maybe this is just for somebody that has a small pedal board. But these are still really cool. I actually used one of these on a rig build for Sean Hurley, the bassist for John Mayer and Vertical Horizon and all these folks. He uses one, and that was great. And then this is the smaller expansion supply that you could use on the Cioks, which is the Eventide branded one, but is ostensibly the same thing as the Cioks 4. So the Eventide Power Mini, you could use these interchangeably. I love this to expand a Cioks DC7. Fuel tank, I don't get it. I don't think that today they make sense money-wise. You could just get a switch mode power supply that does way more than this. So I'm not even really going to go there. These are just various bundles, it looks like, for some of the Strymon stuff. We talked a little bit about Truetone already, but here's another one of their options, which is the XP8, which is again like an 8-output expansion that you could tap off the larger the Truetone is the CS11 and get another 8 outputs out of it. We already talked about Mission. This is another one of those with that I would say stay away from. It's got the transformer in it. This is a linear supply. This is kind of, an era of Voodoo Lab, which I think, they had to do it because they needed to have the higher current, but just in today's pedal world, it just doesn't make sense to use that, and you can get stuff that's better for the same or less money. I think we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel here. CS6 here is also great from Truetone. Again, mains included, 6 outputs, super low profile. You can expand it, but it's a great supply. I've used this many times. This is also another one that's great from Truetone, a little bit bigger profile. CS7, so 7 outputs, one of them's 18. The other thing too, some people get knocked for a loop when they see this 18 volt. They actually make a cable that can take it from 18 down to 9. So if you wanted that 18 volt to be a 9, you could just buy one of their conversion cables and it would just bring it down to 9 volt for you, so you wouldn't have to worry about, overpowering something or damaging it. We talked about Gator. I don't know much about those. These are any, now we're kind of getting into like these novelty supplies. This Zeus one looks like it might just be an expansion supply from the other one, from the larger Zeus that we talked about. But on paper, these look good. I'd be curious to see more of this or check out more of that and kind of see what the deal is with those. Here's another expansion supply for the Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 303 Plus. Again, all 9 volts, gives you 4 more outputs. Again, just kind of an expansion supply. We already talked about that Truetone. Is this a different X4? Let's see. Oh, this X4 is a little different where it gives you two 18-volt outputs. So you could get the X4 18-volt and give yourself the option for two 18-volt outputs. So I guess that's kind of how they're giving you the options back, is by having you expand and then do it that way. And then these are little expansion MXR devices for the MXR brick that you could add on if you wanted an additional 4 or what's this, maybe 7 outputs there. Again, we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel here. Let's just see if there's anything more on the last page. Yeah, kind of nothing consequential. We talked about the crux, which is the way that you can power something like a quad cortex if you wanted to, and it's just a real small sort of extension supply that you can add on. I think we're kind of there right now. So anyway, that was the gamut of power supplies, and I think I tried to give you a good sort of synthesis of what each of these mean, where they might come into play, kind of some stuff to avoid. And again, when I say that the Voodoo Lab Mondo, Pedalpower 4x4, ISO 5, Pedalpower Digital weren't great, again, it's kind of all contextual. Like, you could make them work if you needed to, and many of us had to because that was the only game in town. I would just say, comparatively to the field now, you don't need to buy one, because you can get one that will do those things and have all the kind of modern amenities of a modern day power supply, and you don't have to worry about where you put it causing more noise or not having enough current or having to use voltage doublers or current doublers to kind of get what you need. So I just think they're sort of obsolete is probably the best way to characterize those supplies. And if you want to buy any of these, you should definitely head over to Sweetwater's website. I've been going through there and kind of, again, talking about all these, searching under Pedalboard power supplies is kind of the overarching heading in the search bar there. And you can check these out. I will link them in the description. If you shop at Sweetwater, it can help us in turn as being one of their affiliates. So if you end up buying something, it in turn helps us and helps the podcast. But some other sponsors that made today possible and this conversation possible are our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary. If you're interested in checking out some of these same power supplies, most of them are also available over at the Guitar Sanctuary. So you can check that out there. And again, supporting them helps support us. Also, our friends over at BTPA, Bestronix, they make amazing stuff. You can get customized cables in addition to all the supplies that you might need in order to build the pedalboard of your dreams, whether that's 2.5 millimeter barrels, 2.1 millimeter barrels to expand your power supplies. Any of those specialty cables that can help act as the link between, say, a smaller power supply and a larger power supply, whether it's Cioks or Strymon or whoever it is, they make all those parts. They also can provide you those parts if you want to do it yourself. Head over to btpa.com. You can ask for Brad if you need any help, and you can use the coupon code DUTCHAIRS at checkout to get 10% off your entire order. Also, our friends over at Neural DSP have our preferred plugins, and if you wanted to power a Neural DSP product like a Quad Cortex, we talked about the Crux as being one option. Also, Walrus's high power supply, the HP, also offers that same benefit. Also, their plugins are best in class over at Neural DSP. And if you're interested in checking out any of their plugins, which will soon all be able to be migrated over to the Quad Cortex, which is pretty amazing because I love that Soldano plugin and use it all the time. That SLO sound is really, really great. You can head over to the Neural DSP website, use the coupon code Chairmen, get 30% off any plugin that is 90 days or older. Also, I wanted to talk about our friends at GB Music and Sound for all of our Canadian viewers. If you are interested in going and checking out a place that has all sorts of great stuff like these power supplies, in addition to all of the boutique amps and guitars of your dreams, head over to their website, check it out in Alberta, Canada. You can peruse, you can buy, and if you do, they give us a small kickback as a commission, as a thank you for sending you their way. I got it. So head over there, check out that link in the description. I also want to mention one of our other sponsors. I want to make sure it's not eluding me because we've been changing our sponsor list up with some regularity. So I want to make sure I get to everybody. that was everybody. So I did make it happen. So I want to appreciate you all for being here. I want to add that if you want to learn more about power supplies, you want to have a conversation with us directly, we have a Facebook page for Chairman of the Boards that is free to join, doesn't cost you anything. You can head over to Facebook. I think it's just like facebook.com/group/Chairman of the Boards or something like that. Or just type in Chairman of the Boards. I think we're the first group that shows up. It's got the same logo as our podcast. And you can ask questions, post pictures. Brian, Grant, and I are all there all the time. We're answering questions, all that stuff. So please do join us there. And if you are willing to write us an honest review about your experience with the podcast, we're not asking for 5 stars. We're just asking for an honest review. That would go a long way in helping other people like you be able to find our podcast and enjoy it, or not find it if it's a bad review, based on what you've said. And so this is one thing that just, again, helps us make this sustainable so that we can do it over and over and over again, week in and week out. I really appreciate you all being here. And until next time and next week, we'll see you.